like he said, my name is Kara Mercer, and maybe I brought this crazy weather with me from Seattle, so I'm sorry about that, but hopefully the pictures will make up for it, and the stories will tell throughout this presentation. So I'm going to try to go about this a little bit differently, because I know that most of the presentations you sit through, it's a lot of gear, it's a lot of information, it's a lot to digest all at once. So I'm going to tell you guys some stories from my own travels and what I've learned along the way, what kind of gear I'm using, and just altogether what that looks like being a traveling photographer. Does that sound good to everyone? Cool, yay. Okay, so we'll dive right in. So my topic, I'm talking about a suitcase, Fujifilm, and the open road. I really want this to be a presentation that explains my work and why I shoot the way I do and why I go about my business the way that I do every day. This particular slide I think is very important for us to remember. Whether you're a beginning photographer or you're someone that's been shooting for 10 years, you always want to think about what makes you feel alive when you're shooting. I ask myself this all the time, and it's something you're going to continue to ask yourself throughout the years that you're photographing people or landscapes or whatever it is that you're passionate about. So don't be afraid to ask yourself all these deep questions, because ultimately your lens is going to be drawn toward images that produce this type of work, right? Makes sense. So I asked myself this quite a bit along the way. I'm not sure why this clicker isn't working, so I'm going to go ahead and forward it for you guys. So one step at a time. This is something I take to heart every day that I'm working. Freelance life is very up and down, and when you're doing jobs, it's go, go, go 1 minute, and then the next minute you're slow, and then there's always off season. So I always try to think about my initiatives in my business, and these are things that I think about all the time, and what adventures I wanted to go on next, and what those look like for the goals that I have within my business. So the first thing I can honestly tell you is just pack a bag. Do it. Don't be afraid to do it. Many people say throughout their lifetime, oh, one day I'm going to do this, or one day I'm going to do that. But most of the time, we don't ever get those things done, right? Most of us are like, oh, well, I said I was going to do that. So just pack a bag. Get in your car or get on a plane and go somewhere. Don't be afraid to say yes to risks. Sometimes life is going to present those to yourself, and you have to ask yourself, do I take this risk, or do I just sit back and wish that I had done it and have regrets about it, right? So none of us want that. We want to live lives to the fullest every day that we have. And also write down your stories, your experiences. I can't tell you how important this is, because there are so many stories in my life that I've found to be very important and things that I'll carry with me forever. But the vividness fades after a while if you don't really write down what that meant to you, what the smells were like, what the sounds were like, what the people felt like, and the conversations that you had. So you always want to make sure that you write those down so you can adequately share those with people for further types of things you want to explain or why you shot the images you did. So the first project I'm going to explain to you is a job that, I don't know why it presented itself, sorry. Let me backtrack for a second. So for Travel Alaska, I ended up shooting a job. I got a call and an email out of nowhere. And I thought to myself, that doesn't always happen. You get an email from someone, it doesn't always pan out, and you ask yourself, okay, I'm really excited about this, but is it really going to become a job that happens, or am I going to be able to actually produce this work for someone? So when Condé Nast calls me and emails me and says, hey, we want you to go to Alaska and be our photographer, I'm immediately like, oh, that sounds really too good to be true, you know? So I was really excited, and I immediately responded to them and asked them what their objectives were. What does this trip entail? What do you want me to do for you, or what kind of content do you want me to create? So they said, we want you to work with us at Land's End and Travel Alaska to feature not only the clothing, whether that's men's, women's clothing, as well as a travel feature with Condé Nast, and Travel Alaska. So Alaska had a lot of initiatives that they wanted to show how global warming affected people in the region, as well as the scenery and the wildlife refuges that they have. So these were very important initiatives to them. So I got on a phone call, and we're talking about all the logistics, and I asked them all the deliverables and what types of, just what they're looking to get out of this experience. And, you know, we actually got it done. And here I am, and I'm actually getting to tell you guys how exciting this trip was, because how often do you get to work with Condé Nast on a trip of a lifetime? So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about what that looked like from start to finish. For me, a random email turned into a jam-packed 5 days worth of traveling around Alaska. And there were many things that presented that were challenges that I had to overcome and think about in order to produce the work that I was really proud of. And some of those things were, we had 6 boxes. And at the time, they were asking for men and women's images, right? So I somehow coerced my fiance at the time to be my model. And I had to model personally in the images I was actually shooting as well. So, right, that's a challenge. That's a really hard challenge. Some of us, it's really hard for us to set up a tripod, and you need gear that allows you to capture those images easily while it's negative 30 degrees outside and you're freezing to death and barely able to like move your finger to touch the shutter, right? So these are really important things that I learned to manage and to work with in these conditions. So we had 6 boxes worth of clothing that showed up on our door, right? And somehow we crammed all of those 6 outfits of like huge winter gear into a suitcase, and we may have sat on it to close it, but we accomplished it, right? So we made it to Alaska, got off the plane. My fiance and I talked over the shoot list and what we were looking to deliver for each day, and it was challenging. We had 2 outfits that we had to wear each day, and there were 4 hours of light, guys. 4 hours. That's 24 hours in the summer in Alaska and 4 hours to accomplish all of this, not counting the travel time from place to place. So if you don't have a good plan in place, you're pretty much screwed in all sense of the word. So one of the other stories that was really funny about this trip was dog sledding. We were set up to go dog sledding, and I thought after all of these layers, we are shooting images of the clothing and the details as well as the landscapes. And I'm like, oh, sure, we'll have enough clothing. We'll be fine on a dog sled. No, it's like 14 miles per hour in negative 30 degree weather. So here I am, we arrive at this house, and my fiance and I are like, oh, you mean we have to put on more layers? I'm not sure how I can manage all that I have on now. So we put on more layers. They give us these boots that must have weighed at least 5 pounds per foot. So here I am, like this little human wrapped up in 2 coats, and I have like 5 scarves on, and my camera, and I'm like trying to even raise my arms, and it's really difficult. And I walk out of this house that we're going to get on the sled, and I pretty much nearly eat it. Like trying to get down the stairs in these boots with gear, and probably almost damaged all the gear I had, because these are the things you face in different climates, and you're either prepared for it and you just fly with it, or you don't. So that's just something that I really want you to think about and challenge yourself to think about what happens when you're in different places and what you learn from them. For me personally, I learned a lot about this trip. Personally, I saw, they have bison burgers, they have elk meat, and they also make buffalo chili, which being a Texan, I thought was very interesting, even as a Texan, as well as reindeer sausage, if any of you have actually been to Alaska. So there's a lot of really fascinating elements of this trip. We ended up going to a hot springs. We also got on a train from Fairbanks to through Denali over to Anchorage. And throughout this trip, we had many things planned throughout the agenda. We had ice skating. We met a bunch of people that were actually in the Iditarod, which is the longest winter marathon, if any of you have ever heard of it. So they have fat tire biking as well as dog mushing and cross-country skiing that takes place. And it's a huge event for Alaskans. So we were able to meet these people and tell their story and just be able to like immerse with the culture around us. We even had to get creative at points. This particular image, we went to the Ice Museum and it was beautiful, but it was also at 9 p.m. and the light was like absolutely non-existent in there. So in order to keep with a flow and a theme of what the images felt like, I needed natural light, right? Because everything that I'm shooting is golden light and beautiful and soft. I don't want this harsh, weird flashlight that's happening throughout the series. It just doesn't fit, right? It doesn't help the story and create a strong stance for it. So we actually hid those martini glasses and we got real creative and came back and photographed them the next day. And surprisingly, no one found them in the snow and we were able to capture that moment. So you're always going to have to get creative in environments like this. You're going to have to be prepared for it. You never really know what that's going to look like till you get there. So that is the lesson I really learned from that. And that's the whole takeaway I want you to understand about this job. It's something I'm really proud of, and I feel like even to this day, I feel really like honored that they found me generally through an image. I posted an image in Alaska before this trip, and people pay attention. They saw that image, and that is the whole reason why I got that job. I had a structure put in place for how I put out content. If you don't have a structure, I strongly recommend you find one, because if that hadn't happened and I hadn't had a way to like take my images from processing the files to putting them on Instagram, to putting them on Pinterest, to putting them on blogs, to sharing them in other spaces or other like publications, then who knows if they ever would have found me, right? So put your work out there. Have like a strategy for how you want to simulate that across different like publications or blogs or Instagram, whatever it is that you want to do and you feel like is great for your audience. So that's something I think really helps to understand that trip, and I hope that you've enjoyed the images through Alaska. We're going to proceed into featured works. So these images in particular, were based in Iceland, in Scotland, in Italy, as well as Copenhagen and parts of like West Coast. So I've lived along San Francisco, and I currently live in Seattle, so there's a lot of Pacific Northwest images in here as well as some portraiture if any of you are interested in portraiture as well. So we're just going to go through this, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what my thought process is when I actually get on a job and I'm out and I'm shooting, and how I look for opportunities to create more and simulate different types of content to utilize, whether I'm shooting the same project in the same place. I'm creating not only one job out of it, but two. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I do that. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is just be creating. Get out there and use a tripod if you have to. This is an image of me in New Mexico. I was actually with our little dog, and she was sitting behind by the tripod, and I was using FUJIFILM's remote shutter app. So you can't see, but my hand is behind my leg, and I was easily able to see what the shot looked like. I was able to transition and move around and capture this without anyone else there. There was absolutely no one in this desert, like, at all. And this is in rural, like, New Mexico. So I search out places. I'm constantly saving places that I want to go, places that I want to capture photos in, and creating concepts out of it. So I set up shoots. Like, you'll see a series of shoots within these images that I've set up in different countries. They were shot for different brands or hotels or travel agencies. And you just have to get creative with that. Sometimes you have to pitch that work. Sometimes the work comes to you. And you just have to balance that. And life is never one of those things where someone hands you an opportunity because you deserve it, right? So sometimes you have to create those opportunities for yourself. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about examples. These were actually taken in Sayulita. I was there to photograph a project and a friend's wedding who's actually a commercial photographer. So what did I do with that? I don't really shoot weddings anymore. I started 9 years ago shooting weddings. But occasionally when a friend comes to me and they've been in the industry for a long time and they respect my work, I'm like, okay, let's do this. So I went and I created a travel project from that and a guide to Sayulita. I posted it on my blog, I shared it on Pinterest, I shared it on my Instagram, And I let people know about what I was doing. Those images ended up getting picked up by WestJet magazine, and a couple other people reached out for those images to actually put them in their publication. So that's what I mean by you don't just take the project that you're handed and go with that project. You also create something out of it that benefits the direction you're trying to go in moving forward. Does that make sense to everyone? Right? So in doing that, I have really honed in on how I use my gear and what gear I use and why. So for me, I use all of the X Series gear when I'm traveling. I'm always carrying 2 cameras on me at once. And I have usually a zoom lens on one camera and a prime lens on the other. And do any of you know why? I'm sure you can answer later why I do that. But the main reason is because I don't know what I'm going to be faced with. If I'm in a moving car and I have to take an image and I don't have the right perspective, I don't want to take that shot if it's busy and it's got a lot of things in it that are unnecessary. So in order for me to make that shot what I want, I have to use different lenses and use what's on my camera. And sometimes you have 2 seconds to take a shot. You have to get it then or you don't get it at all. And I'm very much a purist. I don't like to crop my images down because I feel like you need to be aware of the resolution and what you're losing when you start cropping images down. You need to try to shoot it for exactly what you want. If it's like shooting up at a building, try your best to get the perspective as close to accurate as possible. Of course, that perspective you're gonna have to adjust in some way, shape, or form. But that's not always the case, right? So think about that. I always try to take a different focal length to projects and move around a lot too. I don't just stand still when I'm taking portraits of someone and wait for them to move. I'm constantly trying out different angles and different ways of shooting something or putting something in front of my lens. That's really important to get creative with it. Don't just take a shot for face value in what's standing in front of you. A lot of these images I've taken on the go. This one in the airport, I literally had to coerce my husband now to stand over there, and I was like, this is gonna be an amazing shot. Please, 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 please do it. And luckily he obliged, and those are the things that I do. I see them, I make them happen, because I'm always carrying a camera with me. If you wanna be a photographer, don't carry your camera to a photo shoot or on a trip and then leave it at home every day of your life. You're in New York City. There's 1,000 things happening around you, and you never know what moments you might capture that someone else wasn't watching, right? So I transition with a lot of lenses throughout different types of shooting. For most of my portraits, I use prime lenses, whether that be a 23, a 56, a 50, and a 35. I also love the 90 millimeter because it adds such a beautiful effect for portraiture. I also love the 10 to 24 for zoom lenses. It's perfect for shooting landscapes and so easy to get a very wide scene to fit and without having to patchwork it all together, right? If any of you have actually done that before, it's a lot more work than just getting the scene as is. So for me, I've also used the GFX. I love the GFX for portraiture as well. It's so crisp, it's so clear. And having gear that's portable and easy to use, it's not clunky, I don't feel weighed down by it. I'm able to get images and quality that I'm proud of and that my clients are happy with. And that's overall the best thing I can say is it's seamless. All the menus are the same. You know what's going to be the same from camera to camera, and it's easy to transition all of them, and for the back end of your file storage, for that to be a simple way to organize as well as process for a similar feel. So remember when I said earlier I planned shoots in different places? This is what I planned in Iceland. This was not a project that I was paid to do. It was a project I did for myself. You always want to be creating personal projects because that in the turn becomes the images that people see your heart lives in. My heart lives in things that I create, concepts that I've written down, and people are able to see that. And it's also the work that you value the most. So always be pushing to do your own personal projects, no matter if you're paid to do it or not, because those are the images that are actually going to be standing out throughout your portfolio, and people will start hiring for you for that. That's ultimately what we want, right? Just to shoot everything we're passionate about every day, right? I know for me, it definitely is. So the last images are from a shoot with the GFX, which you guys will see later on. This was a concept I dreamed up. I know you saw a few of the images prior where they're holding hands and leaning apart from each other. These photos are some that I'm very proud of because I art directed it, but I also learned when to give space. So I let there be candid moments as well as really strong images that stood alone by itself and told a story as well. Okay. So the next project I want to tell you a story about is Visit Faroe Islands. So if any of you are not familiar with the Faroe Islands, it is very, very small. And it's north of Copenhagen. And last July, I got an email from Visit Faroe Islands, and they said, hey, we saw you're coming to Copenhagen. We would love for you to come to Faroe and tell some stories of our people, as well as get some landscape shots. And I thought, okay, you have 24 hours of daylight, I'm in. That sounds awesome. And being a West Coaster, I love rocks formations on the beaches. I love interesting structures, and Faroe has everything that has to offer. Also, they have some cute sheep that just roam around. So we arrived in Faroe Islands right after going to Copenhagen, and Copenhagen is such a busy city streets, and it was a vast difference from place to place. But the best thing about Faroe Islands is the scenery. Are you kidding me? Look at this. So these roads are tiny one-lane roads that go through the entire island, and there's bridges that connect one island to the other, but they're all underground. So it's a little terrifying at first. I'm like, oh, we're underwater. When are we going to be out of this? That's kind of crazy. But there's also these magical patches of light. This light just changes constantly. There's fog that rolls in, and you never know what you're going to get each day. It's very, very hard to sleep in Faroe Islands because as a photographer, we're all looking for that beautiful golden light shot, right? Well, try having golden light all day long, and you're like, I'm just never going to sleep again. That's really what's going to happen. So in Faroe Islands, we were able to photograph these horses that were on the ridge of this cliff. It was like a cliffside, and they had this insane backyard of sea and this vast ocean around it, as well as tiny little towns full of red and blue and yellow colors. And it's immaculate to see how vast and spread out and how these villagers live their life day to day. It's very small. They have maybe 4 restaurants in the whole city. And at the time when we visited, everyone in the whole town/country, which is very small, graduated, and we were unable to even get a table at any restaurant, and there's literally 4 owned by the same guy. So we ate muffins, and then we ate more hot dogs from the gas station. But that's life. That's what happens. When you think of travel photography, you think of this glamorous thing where everyone's living it up at these 5-star hotels, and their luggage never gets lost, or they never have a moment where they don't have perfect images. That's so opposite of what actually happens. On this trip, we actually landed the night this image was taken, and we had this insane amount of light that broke through these clouds. And we were standing in someone's backyard taking these photos, and luckily they didn't kick us out, and they were like, oh yeah, go ahead, do what you're gonna do. So people were so welcoming and willing to let us photograph whatever it was about their culture and tell us more about it. One of my favorite areas is Torshavn, which, like I was saying about the colorful houses, this really draws my eye. It's stunningly beautiful. It was raining this day, so it just added this amazing reflection to this little area. There's also one coffee shop in this whole place. So we sat here many mornings just taking in the view, and we didn't care about the rain. It was no big deal, but we just embraced the culture, and we really loved being there. And that's something I really value is my images don't stand for themselves if there's not something I understand about these people. So when you're going to a place, you need to take it all in. You need to understand what these people are about, what they value, what are the things about this place that they love and their own, like, culture, you know? What is that? And be able to write it down and portray that in images. This particular spot is called Jove. It sounds really interesting spelled if you ever look it out or look it up. So we went to this spot, and they have this beautiful lookout and this inlet that's so lush and green, and it's vast, and you can see from like one ocean area to the next. And it kind of reminds you in this space how small you really are. And especially when you're driving on tiny little hill like edges, literally there's a cliff on one side, and here you are in this car on the other, trying to like not fall down into the ocean. It makes you feel like time just kind of disappears. And that's how I felt in Faroe Islands. And the shot that you saw earlier, where there's a low tide, and I sat in that water, I had water up to my knees, and I was waiting for the right shot and the fog to roll in. You're always going to be waiting for those moments. And if people say, oh, I just got it and left, that's not true. That's never the truth. Most of the time, this was right before that shot was taken, when the tide was still pretty low. And as it rolled in, I was about knee deep in water. And as we left, I was like walking out, slushing like my tennis shoes full of water. But I was able to get the rock structure, the scenery, the feel of the place, and actually see how it feels when the fog rolls in and the sunlight meets the fog. And it's magical. I could have stayed there probably all day long if my husband had let me. Luckily, but he was like, no, we need to eat, and there's no food on this island, so we have to go. Also, there's no shortage of waterfalls in Faroe Islands. It's not abnormal for people to have them in their backyard, and honestly, it'd be the best backyard view, in my opinion. So Faroe Islands is just a magical place, and I feel really lucky that I was able to capture these images for them, as well as experience their culture. And that's just something that I really want in my business, is to be able to be affected by the people around me, as well as be affected by me and learn from each other. Because that's really what life is all about, right? It's just I get to take pictures and tell those stories as well, right, with the words. So the next thing I'm going to share with you is a project with Jordan. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Jordan, but it is an incredibly amazing place. I went there this last October. This is another one of those jobs. I had a random email, and they said, hey, we want you to go to Jordan and work with Matador Network, as well as visit Jordan, to tell a story about the culture and the landscapes of Jordan. We want you to take portraits. We want you to tell their story. Oh, and by the way, we want you to model in a film for their entire government agency. So at first, I was unsure about this, and I thought, oh man, I've never been to Jordan. I've never been to the Middle East. I don't really know what to expect. We talked over a lot of the logistics, and I wouldn't stand up here and lie to you and tell you that I wasn't curious or a little concerned, just because of everything happening around Syria, and a lot of our trip was going really far north. But you know what I learned? That you ask a lot of questions with every job that you have. It's always good to know the logistics and what you're going to get yourself into. And after that conversation, I got really excited about what was ahead of me, because it was going to be a trip of a lifetime. It's a trip for me to really tell a story, and that's something that I'm really fascinated by, is people and getting to know them and breaking down these barriers where we all understand each other, because that's half of life. You don't understand one person, they don't understand you, and if someone can bridge the gap between all of that, that's the whole point, right? So this was a trip I was very excited about. We talked about the agenda and the deliverables and what they needed from me, and the story starts in Amman. So I land in Amman, I meet with the crew, And the first day, we were actually set out to just explore the city, see the citadel, as well as just meet the locals and just see what happens. I had asked them for some structure, or not a terrible amount of structure with this trip. Because what happens is if you structure a trip like this so much where you can't have any space to actually create images that have life or meet people or the chances that you encounter, then you miss it. You miss something that randomly might have happened to you. So for this first day, these are a few street scenes of what happens around Amman, and we were headed to meet the Duke. And this was the most exciting day, which says a lot in Jordan for me. So I arrived in this old building that had been renovated by this man. And this is the Duke, and he was this man full of life and stories, and he had been spending his whole life farming and giving back to people around him in Jordan. And his words are, we cannot enjoy modernity if we neglect our past and our heritage. That's something that's really important to think about. So he created in 1924 called the Duke's Diwan, which is an old post office that was created in 1924. The meaning Diwan in Arabic means room in the house always open for guests. This is a very accurate description of what the Jordanian culture was like for me. I loved being in this space because there were so many poems and sketches and listening to this man's story, and he was just so full of life and kindness, and he embraced me, and even with the language barriers, he asked me many questions about where I was from and what I was doing in Jordan and how he could help, put me in touch with people or whatever it is we needed. So the Duke's Diwan has become a meeting place for people all around the world, for creators and visionaries, and people just stop in and say hello. It's always an open door policy. Everyone's welcome, and they genuinely mean that. And I think that's something about the Jordanian culture I found to be incredibly warming, because people say that in America, and I know I've said that, but they truly mean that. Anywhere you go, you'll be invited into their doors, and they'll be like, come on in, we'll make you dinner. In this particular case, we first sat down over tea. So we had tea, and we had kunafa, which is a dessert that they eat all the time, in the middle of the day, at night, at breakfast time. It's very sweet. It has cheese in it and this crunchy stuff with honey on it. It's very intense if you have more than one a day, but you just got to eat it and just go with the flow. So we had kunafa and tea, and we talked a little bit about his family, and this is an image of him. And throughout the day, he took me to not only the post office, but his home. I met his wife. I was invited in for coffee. I was invited in for lunch. I was invited for dinner. Anything he could possibly invite me to, he wanted to. And his wife was so kind. And their home was probably the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I think I meandered around their home for like a good 20 minutes. And I was like, not trying to be creepy, but this is amazing. And I'm so fascinated by you. So this is an image of him right before we went to his special place that he has. It's a house full of junk treasures that most people in this world would think, oh, this is just trash, you should get rid of it. Not him. He collected all of it. If you put stuff out on the streets, he'd be like, I'll take it, it's mine. I'll redo it. I'll give it a new life. So that's exactly what he did. And this is a post office that he created. It has many old portraits of him. People love to give him drawings of himself, sketches. They just really adore this man, and they've been around him for years, and locals just stop in throughout the whole day just to say hello as well. These are some images. This is from the post office. The next one is actually from his dining area. Isn't that insane? Look at the tile. There's so many details within his house that I just I did my best to sit there and just try to make notes about his story. And then once they kind of trailed off, I was like, I'm gonna go walk around your house. Is that okay? And he was more than happy to show me about his art and just what it is he collected over time and why these items were special to him. Because no one else thought these items were special. And he gave back to his community. He not only restored these pieces, but he gave them back to people that actually needed them. This is more from the post office. As you can see, these are old paintings from Amman from many, many years ago. And the image right there is actually an illustration that someone drew for him as a gift. So the whole place is full of these tiny little items that really tell a story about who this man is if you didn't get a sense just by sitting next to him. So this is his house where he keeps all of his treasures, and it's really close to his actual home. He took us there, and as you can see, he doesn't love all of the portraits of himself within his post office. So he moved a lot of them to this space, and he uses this as his refuge away from home, or away from his busy day life. So his family stops in, and we sit down on this couch and have a lot of conversations. And I just found, I'm not someone that loves pink in photos, but the juxtaposition of what the image that's painted of him next to this very deep man that's telling me stories and sitting next to me, it was so fascinating that I had to be like, give me 1 minute, I just want to take a portrait of you right here, if that's okay. And I was warned before going to Jordan that it's just good to ask people to take their portrait. You don't want to just take it without asking. And he obliged and said, take whatever you want, walk around. I would love for you, your home, my home is your home. So this day strongly left an impression in my mind, and it erased a lot of ideas that I had before going to Jordan. Because I think a lot of the time, we're affected by media and things that, and some of it's true and some of it's just, but sitting down next to a person, it changes everything. It's you and that person connecting, and they're telling you their story, and you're telling them your story. Even the cats love the Duke. The cats literally just hang around his house, and they're just like, this is my owner. He feeds me and he loves me. He was like petting all of the cats that were outside his house when we got there. And he invited us to stay, and they were making food in the kitchen, and they served us coffee. So there was never a chance missed to serve someone coffee or tea. And being the coffee lover that I am, I loved their coffee. They have cardamom in their coffee, and it's usually a small amount that's like espresso. And that was just a very magical day for me, and I just really enjoyed getting to talk to him about his life and experience what life every day for him is really like. So these are some more images around Amman. So we had left his house after many hours of conversing and having coffee. If we could have stayed for 3 more days, and he would have been happy as a clam about it. But we had set out the rest of the day to head to the souk. So the souk is another market within the city of Amman. So we plan to go to the souk as well as the citadel. The image on your right is of the citadel. This image was taken right at sunset, and they have this beautiful rock structure that looks over the entire city of Amman. It's the most peaceful place I think I've ever been, because you can sit up there. We were actually able to close it down because we were working with the actual government of Jordan and have that whole citadel to ourselves. So I was able to walk around, capture images, and sit and listen to their call to prayer. And we were able to do that all day long. So one of the things I really value about going to the souk too was the chance to meet people throughout the souk. When I first got in this marketplace, it is a bustling marketplace where people are rushing in and out. It's their local grocery store where they're picking up their bananas and their oranges and their produce for the week. So it's very busy, and we were trying to get some film footage within the marketplace as well as some photos. But at that time, it was very tricky because I didn't want to just snap photos of people or women, and especially they wanted us to be considerate of women, or if they're wearing burqa, or just women in general, just ask people for their permission to take their photo. And I think an amazing thing because none of us want someone to just take our photo and then post it all over the internet, right? So toward the end of the sook, halfway through, half these people hadn't seen a blonde woman. So they're asking to take selfies with me like I was some kind of famous person. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am not famous. I don't know why any of you want a selfie with me. But they just hadn't seen many blonde women, and they found it to be fascinating. And our translator obliged for a bit, and he was like, okay, it's getting a little weird. Let's move that way. But that's the thing, is these people really wanted to connect with us, and they were open to it. And at that point, I covered my head just to be able to capture candids without people, like, catching the camera or the glimpse coming their way. Because that's half our battle as a photographer, is just blending in. You want to blend in with your surroundings. You don't want people to know that you're always there. So toward the end of the sook, I met these women and this little boy that was so scared of me. He was like, I don't know who this woman is, and she's a little scary because she's different from what I'm used to. And I just started talking to them, and I learned a couple Arabic words while I was there, and I kept asking our translator different words to say to people. And I was able to actually conversate with these women, and they were buying groceries, and they were so kind to me, and that interaction left me forever changed because they were willing to let me take their story and share that and show them my experience and what that felt like to be a woman meeting another woman in another country, and we're from different walks of life. And I just left very moved from that experience because these women were so incredibly kind and generous to me, and they allowed me to intertwine my story with their own. And I think that's the best gift we can give anyone, right? Is to let people in and allow them to tell your story, and you can tell theirs. So that was the end of that day in Amman. So as you can see, the first day was a very high standard for what was going to happen for the rest of the trip. So the rest of the trip, we were headed to Petra, Wadi Rum, as well as Finan and Suitcase. So Suitcase was to be at the end of the trip, which is closer to Syria, and everything else is pretty far, like you go past the Dead Sea. So we stopped in a couple areas before leaving town, and one of them was the Women's Cooperative. These women were in a tiny little village, and they came to this space and created ceramics all day. These women created these insanely beautiful ceramics that I probably would have packed all of them in my suitcase had they let me. And I even had the chance to throw some pottery while I was there and see what that was like. And they invited us for lunch, and we were able to sit around, and there was a little girl and a little boy with us at the table, and they were unsure of me at first, but by the end of it, they were hugging me, and it was really sad to leave them. And it was a really interesting experience because these women were making ceramics to help their villages. They were making ceramics not only to support their families, but to support their community. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And this woman in particular is rolling the clay, and she's getting everything prepped for the woman that's actually throwing all of the pottery. So we spent a good hour or two there, and then we had to adjourn back through the city over to Iraq Al-Amir. So Iraq Al-Amir is a place that I wasn't sure what it was going to be like. And this place it's a historical museum in downtown Amman. And what it really displays is era pieces throughout time with Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, the entire region. So they've collected these head robes, these dresses, and these elaborate jewelry pieces that are hand carved. And they've put together actual historical pieces that were what someone would wear to their own wedding at that time in Saudi Arabia or Lebanon or Syria. And I found this to be such an interesting process because no one has that. And especially with any places that have turmoil, you lose a lot of pieces of history, right? We've lost pieces of our history. And I think it's amazing that this woman sought out to find this clothing and this jewelry and these headpieces to actually tell the story of what that looks like and show people today, hey, 300 years ago, this is what women would have worn to their wedding. And I thought that that was such an interesting experience because I was able to see the fabrics and to ask the woman many questions and explore the entire museum. So after that, we stayed in Amman that night, and then we headed out, and our next couple of days were really packed full of meeting Bedouins throughout Petra, as well as Wadi Rum and Finan. So these places are full of Bedouins, and some of them don't live in caves actually in Petra anymore, but they do run Petra. And these are called donkey boys. So they have these donkeys that they walk around, and people are able to get on the donkeys. And I found the structure and the history of Petra so fascinating and beautiful, and I was able to walk through them and see how high these arches were. And it's amazing to think people were able to do this so many years ago before the construction and technology that we have today. But the one thing that I was fascinated most about is the people walking around Petra. I was more fascinated by kids running around on stick horses and getting photos of them and understanding how their lives have changed through being a Bedouin and the many years that Bedouins have adapted and changed as a culture. So that's also seen throughout Wadi Rum. If any of you don't know, Wadi Rum is where The Martian was filmed. I love Wadi Rum. If there's any place that I would go back to Jordan and probably stay for maybe 2 weeks, it's Wadi Rum. The image on the left is taken in Wadi Rum. We arrived in Wadi Rum at Captain's Camp, and Captain's Camp is this beautiful, elaborate camp full of textiles and bright red, vivid colors, and they make these insane dishes that you weigh 10 pounds more when you go home and you've been there for like 7 days. You're like, this doesn't make sense. How do I weigh so much more? But their meze-style food is incredible, and they hand prepare everything. So from their food to their clothing to how they just take care and pride in what they're doing and how they treat people and their hospitality as well. So on our way to Wadi Rum, we had stopped and we barely had any time to get a shot of the Dead Sea. And that's what I mentioned earlier. Had I not been prepared for that moment, there's no way I would have gotten that image of the Dead Sea. They were like, we don't have time. The agenda's jam-packed. Either you got it or you don't. We got to move on to the next thing. So luckily, I was prepared. I had 2 X-T2s on me and a zoom lens and a prime lens, and I was able to get those shots easily. And that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't prepared. So you always have to be prepared for whatever's next. Also, I had to post images pretty quickly, and I was able to send the images to myself via the Wi-Fi and convert it to a JPEG. So those are things that are really, really good to think about when you're on the road, or even in this case, Wadi Rum, we had no electricity. So if I didn't have charged batteries before we got out in the desert, there's no way it would have happened. I would have been in huge trouble. So after we left Captain's Camp, we adjourned through these crazy red, sandy areas with these jutting up rock structures in these dunes. And we're in a tiny little white pickup trying to get through this sand and not get stuck. So these Bedouins are so amazing at it that they just swerve right through the sand and they speed and they figure out these routes. It was insanely impressive to me because this region is so vast that I was like, I don't even know where we're at right now. And I'm pretty sure if I was lost in this desert, there's no way I would get back to this Captain's Camp. So they become experts at their area and their region and how to navigate through Wadi Rum. So the first night, we were actually planning on getting the camel footage as well at sunset in the middle of Wadi Rum. So we were speeding so fast through the desert trying to get there before sunset went down. Because with the footage, you have to be calculative about how you're going to get the film footage and the images all at once. Because both of us are fighting over golden light, right? So I'm like, are you done getting your footage? Because I got to get photos to deliver to them too. So we set up these 3 camels in the middle of Wadi Rum. We arrived there. I got out, And I actually had to learn how to get up on a camel holding like a candle of like literally fire. And I'm thinking to myself, oh wow, what did I sign up for? Either this camel is gonna like drop me off into the sand, or I'm gonna burn myself with this little lantern that I'm holding. Luckily, neither of those things happened. So good news, it was an incredible experience, and I had no idea what to expect about camels and what that would be like, but it was the most exciting part of that trip for me, because Wadi Rum has so much history, and these Bedouins have so many historical pieces about their culture. One of the historical pieces about Bedouins is their love for coffee and how that intertwines into their everyday customs as well as their traditions throughout history. Many wars and marriages and situations have been solved over coffee in the Bedouin culture. When we arrived in the Finan Eco Lodge, it's a tiny little lodge that is in the middle of nowhere, and it's ran by only the Bedouins in this small community. And in Finan, it has no electricity as well, so back to that. Remember to charge your batteries. And the room was made of rock and stone, and there was no light to even get ready by, and there wasn't a way to charge batteries, but it was so peaceful. And we met a friend named Ali, and he invited us for dinner with his family. They made mansef, which is a dish for Jordan, and it's basically this amazing sauce that they've made out of aged goat cheese and lamb. And they make these handmade every night. These women just create these insane dishes just from scratch. So he invited us not only to have dinner with them, but also to hang out, and we were able to sit on the top of the roof of the Eco Lodge and look out at the stars. And I just remember seeing the moon and how bright it was and how there's no city lights around. And we were able to see so many stars in the moon and take in so many pieces of this culture. So I learned a lot about Bedouin life within the Finan Eco Lodge. And even to this day, my friend Ali will message me, and his little girl was born on my birthday. And he sent me a Facebook message, and he said, "My daughter and you share the same birthday." And the beautiful thing about that is these people want to forge relationships for years. It's not something where they meet you and they say goodbye. It's more like, see you later, we know you'll be back. So these people showed me around, and they took me in, and they gave us tea throughout the desert when we were shooting parts of this film. And this shot in particular is of the women preparing the mansef. And if you'll notice, I can't photograph the women in their faces. And that's something that Bedouins really value, and it's a respect thing. They had someone come in their village and take a lot of photos of these women and plaster them all the internet. And that's just something to be very aware of when you're a photographer or you want to explain someone's culture. This is part of me explaining their culture by not photographing her and not breaking those rules. And they also gave me henna while I was there, and they also have this eyeshadow where they burn part and they use the charcoal to take it through your eye as eyeliner. That was a very interesting process. I was like, oh, you're going to come at me with that eyeliner? I'm really nervous. Someone else that close to my eye. But it was an amazing experience, and it's just something I'll never forget. And these images right here were taken of the portion of making coffee in the desert. So these Bedouins live off the land. They have goats. The goats will just drink out of the water puddle, like right next to them. And the men prepare all the coffee. It's a cultural thing where the men prepare the coffee. They grind it. They literally roast it over the fire. And it was such an interesting process. Again, I love coffee, if any of you missed that. So watching this process was an amazing experience for me to understand how it's gone from them solving things in their culture over just a cup of coffee. Can you imagine if all of us solved our problems in life over a cup of coffee? I think I want to live in that world. So I was able to see them, and they actually sing a rhythm while they're crushing the beans, which is what you'll see on your left. And he was singing a rhythm, and he was explaining to me how you show people when you're done, and how if you serve cold coffee, it's almost like a disrespect thing. And it's seen as rude if you don't serve warm coffee to people. Also, they're very big on hospitality. They have kicked people out of villages because they weren't the most hospitable people in the village. Like, literally, if you're the least hospitable person, you're totally out of the village, so they'll just kick you out. They're like, nope, you need to be better to people. So you can stay for 3 days in a Bedouin's house, and they'll never ask you what your name is or why you came. They'll just welcome you in, serve you dinner, give you coffee, and on the 4th day, they're allowed to ask you the reason for your visit and your name, the 4th day. So the last place that we went was Suitcase. Suitcase was up north towards Syria, and this was a place I wasn't quite sure about. There were checkpoints that we went past, but ultimately, this place was amazing. We got to experience an olive field. We picked the olives. We processed them. I met this woman in the olive oil producing factory, and she ended up giving me some of her olive oil to take home in a bottle. And it was the kindest thing I've experienced, and I loved seeing that, as well as the honeybees and trying the honey from the locals up in Suitcase. So the last bit of word of advice I want to give you is get off the beaten path. Don't just take the route because someone else said it was great. Always be ready for whatever happens. These were the children we left at the Women's Cooperative. And seek out connections in moments. Ask questions about what you're seeing and how it feels. The last thing I'm going to show you is, let's see if it loaded. Oh, this doesn't have it on there. Anyway, I don't think we'll be able to do it. There was a film loaded on here, but it's not on this version. It was the film of Jordan. So if you guys ever want to see it, it's on Visit Jordan's site. It just shows a recap of all of these things that we did throughout this project. I just want to thank you guys all for sitting here and listening to the stories that I've been telling. And please keep in touch. If you guys have any questions, this is my email, my website, as well as my Instagram. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And thank you guys all for coming. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.